Okay, great. We're now live streaming on Facebook as well. So thank you all so much for your patience. And we're going to get started. Thank you for joining us for the continuation of the We Are the Witnesses series. We will be hearing from 3 incredible panelists, and then there'll be time for a short question and answer session. To anyone who is celebrating, I hope you have a happy and meaningful Ramadan. Dr. Aziz is a Harvard preceptor of Uyghur and Shakatoy and will be presenting about the history and culture of the Uyghur people. Samir Amin, our second panelist, is a Boston-based activist who will be speaking about her work to help her father, one of the many scholars targeted. And Streama of Durbin will be speaking to us about her organization, the Jewish World Watch, which strives to not stand idly by in the face of mass atrocities. So with no further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Golnar Aziz. She earned her PhD in linguistic anthropology at the University of Kansas and served there as a research and teaching assistant in Uyghur and Shagatoy. Prior to arrival in the US, she studied at Xinjiang University, where she earned both her BA and her MA degrees and published multiple peer-reviewed essays on the Uyghur language and linguistics. At Harvard, she's a preceptor in Uyghur and Shagatoy in the Department of East Asian Languages and Civilization. Thank you so much, Dr. Aziz, for joining us. Are you able to get the presentation up on your screen?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Okay. I can't really share the screen. I don't know why. Could you please double check?
Sophia, you might have to make the professor a co-host for her to be able to share.
Yeah, I believe she is a co-host. Thanks everyone for your patience while we sort out the technical difficulty.
Yeah, we did check early. It works, but right now, when I click the screen share, nothing in here occurs.
Very weird. Sorry,
Should we
fix that? Would you like to get started while we figure out the
yeah,
That's
sure,
fine.
yeah.
Thank you so much.
Okay, yeah, just let me know when the screen, because yeah, I prepared a lot of pictures,
Sure.
but I can also send you if you want to manage it.
Sophia, why don't we move on to our second speaker while we figure out our tech, and then we'll come back to Professor Aziz.
Sounds good. We will go.
I think I got it. Right now it works.
Great. Yeah, I'm seeing it.
Can
Wonderful.
you see it?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. I don't know what happened, but yeah, let's start. Thank you for having me to talk about the Uyghur culture and like briefly introduce Uyghur. And so first I start like, who are the Uyghurs? The Uyghur, you know, are the one of the most numerous and as well as one of the oldest indigenous Turkic-speaking people inhabiting these days so-called Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region of the People's Republic of China, and are also present in several Central Asian republics in republicans. So from this map, you can see like a current Uyghur land, you know, in this red parts under the China. And we border with Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Russia, Pakistan, Tajikistan, among that. So if we go back to historical background of the Uyghurs, you know, where are these Uyghurs originally from? So we can see the Uyghur and their ancestors established their reign under the rule of the Hun Empire, and then after that, you know, the first the Uyghur kingdom established in 744 to 840, and then later on they move it, and then the Ganju Uyghur kingdom and the Kuju Uyghur kingdom, and then Karahanlit Uyghur kingdom established it. These 3 period, and after that the Uyghur Chagatai kingdom came out, and after the 17th century, in between that time, the Yarkand Uyghur Khanate also established it, and after that is kind of like Kumul and the Turpan are the major parties, like kind of the bags, like the local lords kind of ruled that area. And the final bag was the Yaqub bag. And after that, in like 1933 and in 1944 to 1949, we have the Republic of Eastern Turkestan. And since 1949 until now, the lands and the places occupied by Chinese Communist Party. So we can see from this map, this is like the old Uyghur kingdom established here. And then around the like 840, because one is like the really bad weather in the long winter time, and another one also has like a civil war. These Uyghur people moved to these three different parts. So one is in here, like the Genju Uyghur, they established Genju Uyghur Kingdom. And this one is like a Poju Uyghur Kingdom. These days we call the Turfan area. And in here, the Karahanlı Uyghur Kingdom they established. And this one, the kind of like the capital place was Kashgar at that time. So after that, like from like a 13th century, the Mongol rules there, and like the Genghis Khan's next generation. Genghis Khan's next generation, like Chagatai Kingdom, established that area, and later on, this Yarkand Kingdom also like fell it in like 1705. After that, the Manchu Empire rules that area, and then like the new Republic of China established like 1912 to 1949. And these are the first and the second Republic of Eastern Turkestan. The leader Ahmadjan Qasmi, and these are the leaders for the first Eastern Turkestan Republic. And after 1949, Xinjiang, under the communist China, there are like a few like different steps going on. One will be like integrated into People's Republic of China since 1949. And then 1955 designation as like the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region to like shift our motherland called like that. And then expropriation and the reallocation of property of the land happened, and the land collectivization happened in 1956. After that also has like the great leap forward happened like 1955 to 1962. And then in between 1966 to 1976, the Cultural Revolution happened all over the China, and it also affected to Uyghur land too. And then economic reform started in 1978. So later on, it's like an experiment with capitalism, like since that. So the typo name about the land, these days so-called Xinjiang. Xinjiang actually is a Chinese name, means Xin means new, and Jiang means border. It means like new territory or new border. And Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region is also given by the Chinese Communist Party. And early this land called Eastern Turkestan or Uyghuristan. And in the 17th century to later, like the 300 years, people also called Altı Şehir. So Altı means six and Şehir means city. Altı Şehir, 6 cities. And the geography and the climate in here in this map, you can see there are like two huge like a basin, Tarim Basin and the Jungar Basin, separated with some mountains like there are 3 mountains actually in between these two basins. And then the Himalaya mountain range blocks like oceanic airs. So the whole climate of this area is kind of dry. So from this map, you can see there are Altai mountain, and in the middle we have a Tangratag mountain. And in this part, Karakorum mountain divided this Tarim basin or Taklamakan desert and this Jungar basin, which is mountain. And we also have this Turpan basin in here. It is the lowest, the basin compared with like ocean level in the world. And then we also have like the rivers and the lakes, the Bagrash Lake in here, and then the Sairam Lake. And also have the longest, the inner river, the Tarim River are here. And we also have Ili River, and then in this part, didn't occur in this map, the Irtish River. So, and we also had a lot of natural resources in this area, like oil, like minerals, a lot of. So the population in the official consensus called like there are like 23 million total population in Xinjiang. The 11 millions are Uyghurs, and unofficial estimated like a 15 to 20 million Uyghurs, but we really don't know. And then like 1.5 to 2 million Uyghurs live like outside China, like in the Central Asia, and also some small group of population in Europe and North America. So modern Uyghurs, like this ethno name, actually this is like we had like this name in Uyghur in the old Uyghur period, like in the 80th century. And later on, this name is kind of like disappeared. People, when you ask these people, where are, like, who are you? They say like the city's name, like Kashgarlı, Turfallı, like that. So this ethno name is kind of disappeared in the last 300 years. And then this name reintroduced in the 1921 in Tashkent conference. And then it's like start to use it again, like since 1930s in Eastern Turkestan area. So the ancestors for the modern Uyghurs are old Uyghurs and also native inhabitants of the Tarim Basin area, and also various Turkic and the Mongolic ethnic groups, and also other ethnicities like lived in that area. So let me briefly introduce like Uyghur culture, and one is like religion. So the modern Uyghurs are now primarily Muslim people, and Islam is widely and importantly become like part of the modern Uyghurs identity. So we are the Sunni Muslim, and this is like the famous mosque in Kashgar. This is like how early people go to mosque pray, but and these days you can see from these two pictures, no one can go in. So most of the Uyghurs view being Muslim as an like integral part of their identity, and we adopted like the Uyghur people start believe Islam since like 10th century. Before Islam, Uyghur practiced like shamanism, Tangrism, or Buddhism, and Manchuism, like a lot of different religions. And the elements of parts religious practice are still like evidence from like shamanism. We still have some evidence happen, but the religious in there like become like part of the culture in that area. And for the culture, I would call this is like a Osseous culture, because that like a bad weather, which is the two like Tarim Basin and the Jungar Basin, the weather is so bad, but the local people, like really like intelligence people, created like specific special like Osseous culture. For example, we have agriculture. We plant a lot of different kind of the grains, And then the fruits is really special in that area. The horticulture is really developed. And beyond that, we also have animal husbandry. And then the architecture is so like, I would say it's really famous and really like special architectural design, and outside the building and even the inside. It is so special. And the craftsman is also really developed in that area. So for example, you can see people create all these kind of like instruments, and the handmade like this kind of designs and everything, you know, this is like how people create the jewelry, and a lot of different kind of like carpet, and even like the paper making, and all of these are really special in that area. And this one is like how they make a silk, you know. And the food is also really special, and the Uyghur food is like, yeah, if someone really eat once, they really would like to eat again. So we have like special Uyghur food culture. And the clothes, you know, I just listed like a few in here, but just to count this Uyghur hat, I think I have like more than 100 types of hat in Uyghur culture. And this is like the special in Hoten area. The woman's wearing this small one, is the smallest hat all over the world. And these dresses also, like the woman, and in here it's not really clear, but you can see like in the traditional Uyghur clothes, you can look at what kind of clothes they wear. You will know this woman is like the girl never get married, or the girl get married and who don't have kids yet, and this woman get married and she also become a mom. So just to look at their dresses, what kind of dresses they wear, you will identify it. And also how like they braid their like hairstyle, you will also know. So this is kind of really like a rich culture, I would say. And talk about the music, and the one I really would like to mention here, the muqam and the meshrab. These are, muqam is kind of like traditional folk song. We have like 12 muqams, and become like a UNESCO heritage culture since 2008. And if you play continuously, these 12 muqam will takes like 24 to 28 hours to complete. And Meshrep is kind of like a public gathering. And this is not just a gathering, and the Meshrep is also another like a UNESCO heritage culture. And it become like the heritage culture in the UNESCO in 2010. But Meshrep is gathering, but like the people learn social behavior and how you respect older people, how you behave in the community. You like, people learn a lot from the Meshrep that is gathering. It has a lot of like a different like the parts in Meshrep. And mostly people start like have Meshrep like end of the harvest, like, you know, the late fall, and until the spring come, and then the winter season, they usually don't have too many things to do, so they have like a meshrep. And these days all of these cultures are like destroyed by Chinese Communist Party. And this one, you know, Karis is a underground irrigation system. I would say this is also really like smart way to like create the irrigation system, especially in the desert area. And in Turpan, and this is really like a famous. People create like the underground water system, and they keep their the agriculture and also daily basic water usage. And this one is like not too many places we have a cottage system all over the world. So all of these cultures, you know, is kind of like destroying, And under the culture, I also would like to give really brief introduction about the language and the script. So modern Uyghur developed primarily from three different Turkic historical source. One is Old Uyghur, another one is Karahanlı Turkic, and then the Eastern Middle Turkic Çağatay period. These are kind of ancestor language, and the ancestor language for the modern Uyghur language. The Çağatay language was one of the bases, that was a 600 years history. The ancestor, direct ancestor for modern Uyghur and the modern Uzbek. So the Uyghur language belongs to Eastern Turkic group of the Turkic language family in Altaic language system. And there are 11 million people speak this language in China and about 2 million outside of China. So the brief future for the Uyghur language is, it is an agglutinative language. You add suffix right after the root and give different form and meaning. It is SOV word order, subject, object, verb. And it has a vowel harmony. When I say vowel harmony, when we add the suffix, it should be harmonized with the verb, the word root. And the Uyghur language consists of three main dialects. Central dialect is the Ürümqi, Kashgar, Gulja, Ili Valley. These are called central dialect. And Khotan dialect, and then another one is Lopnur. But when we say this dialect, but all of these are even it's Khotan dialect or Lopnur dialect, everybody in this community, they do understand each other. For example, when we say modern Chinese has 7 different dialects, but some of these dialects, they don't really understand when people speak. So for this dialect, I would say that it is just a language variety, the different varieties. So the script, from a 6th century to these modern days, Uyghur people use different scripts to record their literature and the culture. First one is Orkhon script. This one is Orkhon script, how we write it. It's written from right to left, and it and also up to down. So this in the old Turkic period, people write this script and on the stone actually. The second one is old Uyghur script. This is also written from up to down and from right to left. And this is another one. And we had a lot of the manuscripts exist all over the world in different places. And this one is Uyghur Arabic script, which people used in the Karahanlı kingdom period, 10th to 12th. Since the Uyghur people believe Islam in the 10th century, they adopted based on Arabic script. This created this one. And then this is Çağatay Uyghur script. It is a little bit kind of developed, also reformed based on the Karahanlı Uyghur script. And this is kind of chart in modern days since from 1950s, we start use Uyghur Latin script. And this Uyghur Latin script also has a few different forms. First time we based on the Chinese pinyin script, we borrowed and created one. Later on, we also developed it. And in the Central Asian, Uyghur people also use Uyghur Cyrillic script. And then this one is this one is modern Uyghur Arabic script. We use based on the Arabic script, but all the vowels represented in here. This is how we use and these days. And then, these are the intellectuals in modern days, since 2017, this Chinese Communist Party started concentration camp. and these intellectuals, scholars, business peoples, a lot of people's arrested for no reason, I would say. But I just briefly give you kind of background information how these Uyghur people created this much culture and like the contributed to the world culture heritage. But these days, this culture is being like destroyed. So the very close friend of mine and my former colleague, actually, who worked at Academy of Social Science in Urumqi, he came to Indiana University as a visiting scholar for a year in 2016, and he went back home on 2017 on February. And that year in June 2017, June, he was arrested, and we really don't know what happened to him and right now. So this is just like the one example. There are so many, like almost like more than 3 million people in the camp these days. So here at the end, I really would like to talk a little bit about the language policy in China. So since like 1949, Chinese Communist Party occupied our land. We have like a few different stages of the education like system. From like 1950s until like 1980s, it is like a monolingual, like everybody studied their language. Like the different subjects at school, we use their own language. For example, Uyghur, like as a minority in China, in Xinjiang area, we do use like Uyghur language for all subject courses. We also have a Mongol people. Mongol, they use their own language when they study at school. But like from like 1980s to like 2000, we have like a bilingual education system. But this period, like when I was a child, like we went to elementary school, we only study Mandarin Chinese as a foreign language. We only have like 4 hours per week, just study as a foreign language. But from like 2000 to until like summer 2017, in this like the more than like 15 years, we have like 3 different language policy existed in this like 15 years. The one is like the very beginning in 2000, they start like teach start from middle school, they teach like science subjects in Mandarin Chinese, and then all of the social science like history, geography, literature, these courses in Uyghur. This is like a one rule. After 5 years, there is like another like language policy like system came out, just teach all subjects from like a middle school. You teach all subjects in Chinese instead of the just to learn like Uyghur as a foreign language. And then after that, like in like 2010, like there is like only like 2 hours per week, just learn your native language, Uyghur, as a foreign language. And the rest of the subjects you all learn in Mandarin Chinese. And even like music and the painting, you know, when you learn music, you have to learn like Chinese music, not the Uyghur music. And when you like draw the pictures, you have to draw like, that is like so seriously. In the students in these 15 years, like from like elementary school to go to university level, like once this period, students like faced like 3 different language system, the language policy system. And then from September 1st, 2007, the government just closed, like shut down, I would say, all the minority language. You can't really use minority language to teach any subject. And all of these literature and the language teachers, they lost their job. And then all of these textbooks banned. And even in the recess time, students can't speak in their native language. You have to speak in Mandarin Chinese. So this is kind of like the policy they published in the Chinese official site. And then you can see from these pictures, these are Uyghur kids. And they collected all of this, gathered these kids, and created like orphan style the camp for the kids. And these dresses is not really Uyghur traditional dress. This is like a Chinese dress. They want to assimilate and let them become like Han Chinese, not the Uyghur. And another one, sorry.
No, I'm so sorry. Please continue.
Okay, another one in here, you know, the against the religious and destroyed all the mosques and even like church template, everything. And all of these the holy books are burned, and historical novels also, like a lot of like published books also like burned in there. So you know, under this condition, what we can do, what can we do in here, you know? And I by myself, I have like a self experience since last 3 years. I don't have contact with my family, and I don't what we can do, you know, I just listed few, but I think there are like, if all over the world, like people can hand in hand and think, and we can do a lot of things. Actually, we can against the Chinese Communist Party's policy. We can against and create like new, you know, I think we can do so many different things. Like, for example, these days, you know, don't buy the made in China production, a lot of stuff like that. And also we can call our government to pay attention about the human rights activities related with Uyghur. And we can also like write to our senators and the representatives to support like Uyghur Human Rights Policy Act. There are some bills like, you know, we want to pass like House Representative bills like 649 and Senators bills 178. So all of these kind of things we can do. So I hope, you know, this presentation at least gives some clue or an idea, and we all like help each other to support. And early, I really didn't believe, no one like measure it out this, you know, we all know how Jewish people faced in the World War II, and like how many people passed away. And we always think we human being, you know, as a human being, we should learn from our history, but some people never learn. So I really want this the concentration camp and this bandit, a lot of things like the over, and then the Uyghur people reach to their freedom. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. You really gave a sense of the Uyghur history and culture and language, and how it's unfortunately being threatened. We're going to move on to hearing from Anne Stream of Durbin, and then hear from Samir Amin after that, just due to scheduling restraints. So Anne Stream of Durbin is the Director of Advocacy and Grantmaking at the Jewish World Watch, and oversees the advocacy and projects on the ground. As an active member of the State Bar of California, she's experienced in the field of human rights, humanitarian and refugee issues, international criminal law, and genocide prevention. She is also a member of the Pacific Council on International Policy. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Hi, everyone. I'm just going to take some time to talk about how we got involved in the Uyghur crisis. Jewish World Watch is a genocide and mass atrocity prevention organization founded in direct response to the Darfur genocide, under the principle that we as Jews cannot stand idly by in the face of any atrocities that come remotely close to what was experienced by the Jewish people. So Anytime there's a mass atrocity situation underway, or there are indicators showing that one is brewing, we ring the alarm and come in to either educate, advocate, or run programming on the ground on behalf of civilians that are subjected to war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. So when news started to develop about what was happening in East Turkestan, that's what I refer to as the Xinjiang, because it's the name that is favored by Uyghurs. So when I say East Turkestan, that's what I'm talking about. When news started developing on that, we immediately took notice because there were strong indicators that a cultural genocide was underway. Early on, we heard that up to 1 million people were being arbitrarily detained in concentration camp-like internment camps inside the region, that China had built up all of this infrastructure to support this mass imprisonment effort. The province itself, East Turkestan, had been turned into a surveillance state, an Orwellian surveillance state. Biometric data was being collected, phones were being tapped, Han Chinese people were being sent to live with Uyghur families. There were checkpoints at every street corner, and mosques were closing, and people were getting taken away for such innocuous movements as looking to both sides of the street, before crossing, saying that it replicated prayer-like behavior. So all of this was happening. Books were being burned. Scholars, cultural leaders were all being taken into custody. And all of this was happening. And Jews know very well that targeting culture and leaders is one of the telltale signs of atrocities to come. And sure enough, as all of this developed, more and more information started to leak out, despite China's very robust efforts to create an entire, black box around the region. Various leaks came out in the media that demonstrated, the presence of very clear intent to crack down on this population based on their ethnic and religious identity. Also very detailed plans of how these facilities were run. The Chinese government has done a very good job at trying to propagandize what is happening to the Uyghurs. They've let press in to highly choreographed tours of the region to show them that the Uyghurs are actually grateful for this vocational training and this re-education, that they're allowed to embrace their culture while in these camps. But the truth is that they're on lockdown in very dangerous conditions, especially with the onslaught of COVID-19, that they are there against their will, and that they endure hours worth of indoctrination, hours upon hours of indoctrination and cultural cleansing, if you will. But there are reports of much more egregious violations underway as well. Anything from organ harvesting, calling the organs halal, and having sort of specialized gates at airports for the transport of these organs. There's been reports of people being taken away in buses, never to return. So extrajudicial killings may be underway. And all of this in aggregate has led experts in the fields of human rights and genocide studies also to say that crimes against humanity are likely underway. So just with the existence of these two dynamics, right, cultural genocide and ongoing crimes against humanity, that would be enough for Jewish World Watch to engage in the issue, because we don't discriminate when it comes to who the affected population is. Most of our work right now is actually focused on Muslim minority groups. The Rohingya, for example, are Muslim ethnic minority group from the Rakhine region in Myanmar, and they're the subjects of the world's most recent genocide. Now 1 million of them are in squalid camps in neighboring Bangladesh. So all of that would have been enough, but I think one of the main reasons why we have engaged in this issue too is because there's so much that resonates between what the Jewish people went through and what the Uyghurs are experiencing right now in these like concentration like camps. The stripping of the language, the sort of ghettoization, all of these things just really resonate with Jews, and that was maybe the essential impetus for Jewish World Watch's engagement. But again, it's just as more and more has come out and been established about what the CCP is doing against this population, you know, it's our engagement has just become even more robust. Some of the things that we have been doing in particular is working with local diaspora members and trying to empower them to be the real change makers for their families and their homelands. I think that it's kind of, people don't really understand the traumatizing effect that that what is going on with the Uyghur population in East Turkestan has on Uyghurs in the diaspora. They have been completely locked out of any kind of communication with family members. Almost every Uyghur that I've spoken to or worked with has completely broken down because they don't know if their brothers, sisters, mothers, fathers are alive. They don't know if they're in the camps. They don't know if they've been killed. And this creates a you know, horrible psychological problems for those even thousands of miles away. So Jewish World Watch has been trying to give the Uyghurs who are in the United States a vehicle to be activists. They've been going with us to advocacy meetings with elected officials throughout the Los Angeles area. Multiple officials have just signed on to legislation on the spot after being so moved by hearing the stories of what are going on from the Uyghurs themselves. We also advocate for various pieces of legislation related to the Uyghurs. The Uyghur Human Rights and Policy Act is something that was passed in both the Senate and the House. Unfortunately, 2 different versions of the bill were passed, which then sparks this process of having to reconcile the legislation and then re-adopt it by both houses before it can go to the president to be signed into law. It's unlikely that that's going to happen, which is kind of sad, but the US government has taken notice of this issue. They have issued, you know, visa bans. They have issued certain restrictions and have condemned the atrocities that are taking place against the Uyghurs. There is a new piece of legislation that we're pushing, and I don't want to take up too much time, but I will show you that all of our advocacy efforts are available here on jww.org. These are our current actions. You just click the Take Action button. And one of them is support the Uyghur Forced Labor Act. So this is relatively fresh legislation. It actually puts the onus on corporations to prove that the goods that they're sourcing from that region are not tainted by Uyghur forced labor. That is another, you know, human rights violation that the government of China is perpetrating against this ethnic Muslim minority group. So you can just click here and do it really quickly. All of our other current actions are on this website as well. And yeah, I guess in addition to pushing the legislation, another thing that we've been doing is actually having rallies in the LA area. We did one at UCLA, we did one at the Federal Building, and Uyghurs came from throughout the region. They came by plane because this is such an impassioned activist community. And I feel really honored to be able to work with them and give them a platform to be, you know, the activists for their people. if any of you guys are in the LA area, please come. You know, I regularly update our website with policy briefs and developments related to Uyghur-related legislation on the website. So, yeah, that's what I have to add. But I guess I'm open to any questions that you guys may have. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us and providing an overview of the situation, as well as Jewish World Watch's specific actions that you guys are taking. We're going to move on to our third panelist, Samir Amin. She moved to Massachusetts in 2014 to study biology at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. She now works as a research assistant at the Brigham and Women's Hospital, a Harvard Medical School teaching hospital. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute myself. Thanks for having me here today, first of all, and to give a live example of everything that has been mentioned earlier by both speakers. So here I am sharing my father's story and my advocacy and the campaign that I have done for him. But before everything, I would like to start with asking a question that how many of you are expecting your parents to be in your graduation ceremony and to draw, like to share the joyful moment of, you know, finally finishing your schoolwork and graduating? It's such a, I think it's a greatest event somehow in one's life. And I was having the same hope when I came to America 6 years ago, but it didn't happen to me the same way. Actually, in my junior year, I lost contact with my parents, especially my dad. With my mom, I was able to contact with her, but very, you know, a few times, so a month, because of mass surveillance there. They were afraid of talking to me, and I was also being told that my dad's government work, which is, you know, it was mandated rural work organized by the Xinjiang government in Hotan. And then I was told that this program has been extended for 3 more years. And then at that time, although I knew that, yes, we did have, like, we faced discrimination, this and that, but I didn't know the things would be in these extreme, you know, and I kept believing the Chinese government because I went to Chinese school. I was somehow indoctrinated too. And I had no problem with the government. And then I kept on studying in my college, and also because of the financial issue, because, you know, my family were not able to send money to me at that time because of, you know, disconnection. And then I took so many school credits in order to graduate a half year early. And then it was back in 2017, and then well, I graduated finally, this and that, and that's when I moved back to Boston. And then I started to hear all these news about, wow, Uyghurs being arbitrarily detained, this and that, concentration camps. It came as a shock to me. And at that time, I didn't know about my father's situation, but I was angry. And I started to pay close attention to it. It was last year, November, I got to know the full story that my father, Eminjan Seiden, who is a prominent historian, and he's who has always been a law-abiding citizen of the Chinese government of China, was taken into this concentration camps. And he's also a publisher, a book publisher, and he owns a book publishing house, published over 300 books. Some are in Uyghur language, some are in Chinese and Uyghur language, which teaches Chinese and Uyghur language. And then some of them are even, let's say, a translation of some American writers' books. For example, like 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, or Willpower Instinct. And I had no clue, like, how do I connect all his previous work to the Chinese government's claim, which is that, oh, they're, well, helping Uyghurs to better their life, to re-educate them. Well, my father doesn't need re-education. He's someone who educates people. He graduated from a university and become a professor. And then, okay, their another claim is, oh, they're fighting terrorism and extremism. But the thing is, well, my dad, first of all, he has always been a law-abiding citizen. All his books, all the books that he published went through the government screening, this and that. And then also, he in my memory, he is the paragon of liberal values, and he's a advanced thinker who exemplifies open-mindedness. Sadly become someone who has something to do with their claims. I couldn't understand. And then I got to know that many scholars, many intellectuals, educationals, they've been targeted. And my dad is not the only one. For example, prominent poets and writers, university heads, professor of everything from anthropology to history, Uyghur history, or even Chinese history. That's what my dad majored in and taught in his institute. And then these people are stripped of their position and deprived of liberty in the practice of cultural cleansing, cultural genocide by the Chinese government. I came into this realization. And then I started my individual campaign for my father. I made videos, testimony videos. I wrote open letter to the Chinese government, and went on a couple news outlets, media to really ask for my father's release. I think I forgot to share my father's picture. Let me do that real quick. Okay, so that's my father. Some facts about him: when he got detained arbitrarily, and what I asked. And actually, I did ask for help from human rights organizations and activists in all the democratic countries to help raise my voice. And also, me doing this is not only doing it for my dad. I think us Uyghurs. Was I able to share the screen? I guess. All right. I forgot to mention that in my open letter, I said like many innocent Uyghurs, he's being imprisoned for random reasons, and my father's contribution to linguistic education was seen as a crime. In my open letter, I said, why no evidence against him was revealed? Why no independent lawyer was appointed? Why no public trial? And why everything was so secretly done? And I said, if the Chinese government cannot agree with these basic demands, which are based on the law, like their own law, then it means my father was illegally arrested and imprisoned. It means my father is not guilty at all. And that same questions goes to, can be applied to the rest of the Uyghur folks, rest of the Uyghur scholars. And I'm not gonna stop my campaign for him. And I'm hoping to raise more awareness and get more help. And also, especially from the scholar world, or like students-based groups, because we are the one, like you are students, I'm students, or at least we're all knowledge seekers. And we shouldn't let this happen to first scholars, no matter if it's Uyghur scholar or American scholar or whatever. Second, as a human being, we shouldn't let this happen. And we say never again, we should not let never again happen again. Yeah, I think that is my part. Thanks.
Thank you so much for really making it a personal story and for sharing with us what your experience and that of your family has been. We're going to have an opportunity if you guys would like to ask each other any questions, the panelists, as well as be taking a few short audience questions. Thank you so much. So do the panelists have any questions they'd like to ask each other?
Sorry.
I just wanted to say that if you ever want to partner with us and get involved with the similarly, powerful Uyghur activists that we have on board, I would be honored to work with you in raising awareness. And I'm sorry, I have experienced from my Uyghur friends how painful this is for all of you, and I just wanted to convey my truly, heartfelt empathy for what your people are going through. So
thanks a lot, and I would really love to cooperate with you guys and really be a part of this activism and really raise awareness, and hopefully get all the Uyghurs, including my father, everyone out of that atrocity. Yeah.
Thank you, and yeah, me too. I also really like to closely, work with a different organization and raise the Uyghurs' voice as a teacher and at the university level, and I try my best to do for my people. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. We're going to be quickly hearing from Senior Amitai about ways to get involved with students on campus around this issue.
Yes, hello everyone. It is a deep honor to hear from people that I greatly respect, and that this semester I've come to know, Dr. Aziz and Samira. we were planning to have actually a series of events happen this week on campus. And it was in partnership with other communities, student-run communities at Harvard, both at the college and broad communities. And we plan to continue our work on building solidarity between Uyghur activists and scholars in the diaspora and those who are ready to partner with them. And so on May 15th, there is actually going to be a day of panels that is being run by student activists in the Massachusetts area. And people who are on this list, I'm sure we have your emails so we can share information as it comes. And the plan is to continue working with Samira, working with Dr. Aziz, working with the Jewish World Watch in engaging students and engaging the communities of which students are a part in supporting Uyghur-led activism. So we'll be continuing to do this over the coming months and in partnership with a primary organization, the Uyghur Human Rights Group, and our dear friend Nuri Turkil. So we welcome everyone to join us.
Thank you so much for that invitation. I'd also like to invite everyone to the next of our continued series on faculty speaking about coronavirus. The next one will be Jill Lepore, who's a professor of American history at Harvard. It will be moderated by Hillel Senior Rebecca Thau, and it's Thursday, April 30th at 8 p.m. Thank you all so much for being here. I'm sorry we didn't have more time for question and answer, but I really appreciated all of the individual presentations. I think I speak for everyone here when I can say that I feel like I understand a lot more about the situation and have a bird's eye view as well as personal narrative of what's going on and ways that we can assist. Thank you all so much. Have a Shabbat Shalom and a meaningful Ramadan and a wonderful weekend to everyone here.
Thank you.